Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Hope you're having a wonderful day. It is very autumnal around these parts where I'm recording this here in the UK. We had a bit of a summer back in June where it was this crazy weather. And then since then, it's just been one long, slow death of a summer, stretched out over like 3 months. And now all we have to look forward to is the next 6 months of winter. Such is life, and it's when we can thank our lucky stars for languages, right? So we've got something to occupy our minds and our attention during these crazy weather times. Anyway, would you like to have more guests on the podcast? Would you like to have more conversations and interviews? I've been doing more of them recently, and I've really enjoyed them. In recent episodes, I've spoken to Dr. Barbara Oakley, Jonathan Levy, Gabe Weiner in the last episode. I had that conversation with Chris and Kirsten. We've got Alex Rawlings and Stephen Krashen coming on the podcast soon. I really like these conversations, but it is very different from the kind of short 10-minute Q&A episodes that I normally do. So let me know. Send me a tweet. Drop me an email. Let me know if you like these conversations and if you think I should do more. I'd like to have your opinion. All right, then. Now, today's episode follows on very nicely from the last episode with Gabe, because I kind of avoided getting into a rabbit hole with Gabe about flashcards because it's very technical, and I think for most people, the specifics of my and Gabe's particular interpretation of how to use flashcards is not that interesting. It doesn't really matter all that much. What we both advocate is the sensible, smart use of flashcards to enhance your language learning. That's the main thing, I think. I didn't want to get into a big kind of back and forth about the specifics. But as it happens, today's question is touches on exactly that. So what I'm going to do is take this question today and then speak specifically to this question. So let's hear it.
Hi, Olly. This is Max in Hawaii. My question for you is in regards to flashcards. I use your method of using phrases and going from English to my target language, Japanese. I've been wanting to switch over to monolingual flashcards, though. I'm curious if you, have an opinion on the benefit, or there being a benefit to having monolingual target flashcards. And then the second part of the question would be, if you do think there is a benefit, how would you do that if your flashcards are phrase-based, as, I mentioned there. So anyway, thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. Appreciate it. Bye.
Hey, Max, thank you very much for a very cool question. I hope you enjoyed the last episode that we're in the conversation with Gabe Weiner, where we got into flashcards a little bit there. That was episode 213, if you'd like to go back and check that out. There's also episode 188, in which I answered the question, what are the benefits of monolingual flashcards? So I'm going to start my answer here by giving you a very brief summary of my view on monolingual flashcards, but then I'll move on to talk about actually what I think you should do if you are going to do it, because as you may know, I don't really think monolingual flashcards are a good use of time, but I'll focus my answer on giving you my suggestions. Okay. Now, I think you have to draw a distinction. Well, I would draw a distinction between the beginner level and an intermediate level. So I think at the beginner level, you can use monolingual flashcards for simply learning basic words, whereas at the intermediate level, you've got new challenges. You've got words that don't necessarily translate very well into English. So for example, in the case of Japanese, Mac, how do you translate yatte kureru or yatte morau, yatte ageru? All these different types of compound words in Japanese. They don't translate into English, and so the challenge at intermediate level is a bit different. You can also start to have expressions and idioms and things like that don't translate well. So, whereas as a beginner, you would use flashcards for simple nouns and verbs. At the intermediate level, you're trying to learn much more complex stuff that doesn't translate well. So that's me setting out the stall. Now, my first question to you is to ask you to challenge the assumption that you should actually create monolingual flashcards. So why are you framing the question like that? Why do you want to create monolingual flashcards? I'd ask yourself honestly why you feel like that. Is it because you love flashcards and you want to up the challenge? Is it because you have got tired of using the method that you've described? Is it because you are starting to sense that there's a limitation with having English on your flashcards? And in each case, the big question is, how can you be sure that this is the best way of using your time? Because for me, the big issue with monolingual flashcards is that it slows things down massively, even more than flashcards, a normal use of bilingual flashcards. And so there's a big opportunity cost to spending all your time making and studying with monolingual flashcards. And in my view, there are better ways you can use your time, primarily by spending that time listening and reading to the language and using more specific memory techniques to learn vocabulary. All right, so I just want to throw that out there because often I think we kind of, as language learners, we do have a bit of tunnel vision sometimes, and the best thing we can often ask ourselves is, okay, well, how else could I do things? What other ways of doing things are there? So, as a beginner, I can see the potential of monolingual flashcards for using concrete nouns. So, for learning concrete nouns. So, for example, learning the words for cat and dog. You could have a flashcard with just the word cat or dog written. You could have a picture. You could have the audio, for example. And I can see how some people might like to use that approach to learn concrete nouns. For me, it is simply much more efficient to spend a lot of time reading and listening to good material, because the thing about these basic words is that they're going to come up so much that you're going to learn them anyway. You can't avoid the most common words in the language, especially when you're using kind of beginner textbooks. But I'll acknowledge that there may be people that like to learn that way, so that's fine. As we get to the intermediate level, as we said, this is what we're going to dive into now, because I'm going to make the assumption that Max is around an intermediate level in Japanese, and that's why he feels like he wants to progress to monolingual flashcards. So, first thing, why would you not use monolingual flashcards? Or what would you not use monolingual flashcards for? I'm quite clear about this. Firstly, I would not use monolingual flashcards to create definitions. Okay, so I would not put, for example, the word analysis on one side of the card and then the dictionary definition of the word analysis on the other side of the card. I would also not do the same thing but with example sentences. So I would not have the word analysis on one side of the card and then an example sentence using the word analysis on the other side of the card. And the reason is because this approach to flashcards is using flashcards to learn vocabulary. I do not recommend that you use flashcards at all to actually learn the meaning of vocabulary. Instead, you should learn vocabulary from your study, from your reading, from your listening, from your textbooks, whatever it is that you're doing. And then instead, you should approach using flashcards to practice your output, all right? So practice speaking or writing. In other words, use flashcards to help train you to choose the appropriate word to use in any given situation in your conversation, and then recall it quickly so that you can speak in fluent sentences without spending half an hour trying to remember what the word is. All right, so it's worth labouring this point because many people make the mistake of using flashcards to learn the meaning of words, to practice input. But it doesn't make any sense, because why would you do that rather than, if you can learn vocabulary from rich context, like texts or videos or audio or whatever, that's much better. Now, here's what I think is the most important point about monolingual flashcards. When you think about using flashcards only in one language, the assumption you're making is that, okay, this is going to help me. I'm going to learn faster because everything is just going to be in the target language. So I'll be learning new things in the target language all the time, right? Now, this is absolutely true if you're spending your time reading, say, books in the target language, or listening to podcasts or something like that in the target language. You're immersing yourself. But there's a particular phenomenon with flashcards, which is that you're in danger of learning the cards, and the exercise stops being useful. Now, what do we mean by learning the cards? Learning the cards is when you kind of trigger yourself to learn the answer without actually thinking about the language on a deeper level. So when you're flipping your cards over and over again, and they're coming back up in the deck, you start to associate the answer to the question and the question to the answer. But that's not a very natural process. When you're in a conversation or you're writing a letter or something like that, you have to you will need to try to recall that word based on the meaning that you want to express. It's very, very different from having a definition flashcard, for example, where you have the word analysis and you have to, okay, what's the definition of analysis again? And you kind of pretty quickly, after you've been through the card a few times, you start to memorize this definition in response to seeing the other side of the card. And it's just a very unnatural activity. So the big danger is that you start to learn the cards and you just go over and over and you feel very pleased with yourself because you're getting the answers right. But actually that has nothing to do with communication. The reason that I like using bilingual flashcards is because when I display on one side of the card in English the word analysis, that's a concept I understand because it's my mother tongue. So if I can then take that concept I understand and immediately train myself to say the word in the foreign language, assuming that there is a direct translation, then that is that is a mirror of what happens in a conversation. And that's why it is so effective. So I would not, this kind of goes back to the point about what I would not do. I would not create monolingual flashcards with definitions, example sentences, these things where you have to kind of give a question and reply, complete the dialogue type activity. I think this is all busy work that you end up doing the learning equivalent of teaching to the test. You'll get very good at getting the right answers to these cards without ever really making any improvement in your language learning. And this is why the question I asked you earlier was like, are you really sure that this is the best way to be using the language? Okay, so that's the warning, the disclaimer. So if I were going to use monolingual flashcards myself, how would I approach it? Okay, the main thing is, don't see flashcards as a testing mechanism, right? So don't see it as a way to test yourself to get the right answer. See it as more like a retrieval mechanism. In other words, use the technology of flashcards to store stuff digitally so you can find it whenever you want and practice it easily. Use that technology to help you see the vocabulary more often. The reason that people who read a lot, learn quickly is because they see interesting words and phrases over and over again. So they get used to the way the language works, they see it in context, and they start to learn it. That's why reading is so effective. For me, with flashcards, you should try to mimic this approach of repetition. Those of you who remember my description of the art technique will remember that the R in art is repetition. Notice it's not T for testing. Right? It's a very different thing. Repetition is simply the more often that you see words and phrases being used, the more likely you are to remember it. It's a necessary part of the process. And so the best use of flashcards, if you're going to make these monolingual flashcards, is simply to show yourself the new vocabulary as often as possible. And then you're more likely to actually retain it. So the kind of things that I would think about using monolingual flashcards for are as follows. I'm just going to list them out. First of all, learning Chinese characters. Now, Max, you are learning Japanese, and learning kanji is one of the most important and most difficult tasks. Flashcards are brilliant for learning Chinese characters, so I would not hesitate to do that. There are probably better ways than making your own decks. You can use an app called Pleco, an app called Skritter, Skritter, which is wonderful. A little bit expensive. It's about $15 a month, I think, for that one app, but it's very, very good. You could maybe create a flashcard deck of synonyms. That might be useful. So if you want to expand your vocabulary and you want to know, have a wider choice of words to use, you might create a deck, for example, so you don't just have analysis, but you have assessment. What's another word for analysis? Assessment is kind of a similar thing. And make a flashcard deck out of that. So then you start to see words that mean the same, and you can look over them. The problem with that is, then once you've done that deck of synonyms, what do you do then? I think there's potential for closed deletion or closed tests being when you kind of have a word missing, and then you have to choose the correct word. So what I might do is have the on the flashcard decks, I might have my sentence pop up, and then I might have a gap in the word, and I have to choose the correct word to put in the card, in the gap. That's good for context because you have to read the whole sentence, so you're going to be reading quite a lot. But again, the problem with that is you're going to learn the card very quickly. Like I said before, you're going to learn the answer. So that's only going to be useful for a few repetitions, at which point you just learn the answer. Right? Something else you could do is mine Google or a similar website for example sentences with a particular word. So, for example, you might Google the word analysis, and then look for some interesting sentences with the word analysis in, and simply build your flashcard decks with that. You don't even have to have two sides. You just have one side to the flashcard. Simply have a deck with a bunch of different sentences using that word analysis and go over them, look at them over and over again so that you are spending more time with that word in context. And the other thing you could do is to have something like question and answer cards. But I don't mean this in terms of testing yourself. This is an idea I got from Steve Calfran when we were chatting in Montreal. But we were queuing up for chicken. There's an amazing Portuguese chicken shop I can't remember the name of that big park in Montreal. We were in a queue for this Portuguese chicken, for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and we talked about a lot of stuff, including these little question and answer things. But here's the thing: instead of having a question and answer where you have to kind of guess the right answer, you simply display the question and the answer together, and you read it, and the fact of just simply reading it means you just get a bit more repetition of that word. So it's not like a test, it's just you're kind of using the flashcards just to bring back words from a text or from a story over and over and over again, and it's like that kind of repetition that just helps you get used to the word. That prevents the problem of learning the card. It just becomes more exposure, which is ultimately what we want. All right, so those are my thoughts, Max. That's the kind of way I would approach it. I think really the main point that I want to get through here is that if you do want to go monolingual, so to speak, then just do that. Just go off and read. Browse the internet. Read blog articles. Find magazines that you like. Just do that. I don't see why you need to kind of soak up all of your time with flashcards. I think there's plenty of other better ways to do it. So there you go. I don't know how helpful that was, but I thought it would be a good way to sort of sound off a little bit on my thoughts. If you would like to ask me a question, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. There is currently about a 5 to 6 week wait for questions, but I do get through to them, through all of them eventually. So your question will be answered, providing it's not one that I've answered a ton of times before. Recently, I've been getting a lot of questions about can I learn 2 languages at the same time, and I don't think I'm going to answer these anymore because we've just been over it so many times. A few resources for you then. I've written a little guide. It's called Make Words Stick. Many of you have bought the guide already. It is a very simple guide, and it's got lots of pictures and explanations. And basically, what I do is I walk you through my exact recommended process for using flashcards to learn and memorize vocabulary. Very specific to flashcards. If you don't like technology, please don't buy this guide. You won't like it. But if you are partial to the odd flashcard session and you'd like to know exactly how I recommend using flashcards the right way, based on all my experience of doing this over many, many years, then pick up a copy of the guide. It's called Make Words Stick. You can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/make-words-stick, all one word, to get a copy of that. It's very cheap. It's about $7, but it gives you the whole process that you can then go off and use for many, many years. All of these resources and things that I've mentioned in the show will be available in the show notes, and they will be at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 214. All right then. Feel free to chime in the comments on this episode if you disagree with anything I say or would like to give your input. I appreciate it, and I'll see you back in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story, and we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. StoryLearning.com/courses.